Hi, and welcome to Season 2 of That's Ruddy Mysterious, a podcast of short tales about true mysteries. What created the Potomsky Crater? Who was involved in the 1963 Great Train Robbery? I'm not going to solve those mysteries, but they'll be interesting to learn about. I'm your host, Kelly with an I. Transcripts and references for all episodes can be found at that'sruddymysterious.wordpress.com. No apostrophe and no exclamation point. Today's tale is about the Plain of Jars in Laos. The Plain of Jars was first discovered by the French in the 20th century. In 1935, French archaeologist Madeleine Colony said she found human remains in some of the jars. In the 1960s, it became a place of international strategy when it became a base of operations during the Laotian Civil War. In 1969, the plain was a major battlefield and was subjected to heavy bombing by the United States of America. The plain is believed to be possibly 3,000 years old. The Plain of Jars archaeological project calls the plain one of the greatest prehistoric puzzles of Southeast Asia. The Plain of Jars is separated into different sites, found in Si Quin and Luang Prabang provinces of Laos. The jars are spread across the Si Quin Plateau. There are about 90 of these sites scattered across miles of Laotian landscape. There are about 2,100 archaeological items in total, including the jars, each weighing several tons. The land is pocked with 1,325 stone jars, stone discs, secondary burials, grave markers, quarries, manufacturing sites, grave goods, and other features. One of the jars has a relief carved into it. The relief is an image of a human with bent knees and arms reaching upward. The jars are tubular shaped. The jars are large and well built. They required some technological skill to build and move them from the quarries to their final resting places. In addition to the jars, there are large stones scattered across the landscape. Some of these stones are alone, while others are in groups of up to several hundred. There have been several studies done of the area. The first was undertaken by Madeleine Colony in 1935. She discovered evidence of 3 different types of burials at the jars. The primary type of burial had been full human skeletons laid out. The secondary burial had bundles of human bones buried. The third type of burial was in small ceramic jars, which were marked by quartz boulders on the ground. The buried jars differ from the jars above ground. This type of burial was common in certain parts of Asia. Radiocarbon dating of the human remains found in the ceramic jars showed that the remains were interred between the 9th and 13th centuries, so between 700 and 1200 years ago. These remains are younger than the sandstone jars that remain above the ground. The stones are still very hard to date accurately, and modern scientists did not find any bones or teeth in any of the jars. The next study that was done was undertaken in 1994 by Professor I.G. Nitta of the Kagoshima University in Japan and Lao archaeologist Thongsa Savoyonka, MD. They surveyed and mapped Site 1. They discovered that many of the jars had been broken during the Vietnam War. Laos was the most bombed country during the war, and it is estimated that 30% of the bombs dropped have not yet exploded, making them still very deadly. Due to the unexploded bombs throughout the area, only 7 of the 90 sites have been declared safe to visit. Those are sites 1, 2, 3, 16, 23, 25, and 52. The Australian Research Council funded an expedition to learn more about the jars. In a 5-year project spanning from 2016 to 2020, researchers inventoried sites 1, 2, 3, 12, and 52. The researchers geolocated the jars and collected morphological data. They also excavated 3 sites, sites 1, 2, and 52. Louise Schuon has studied the jars since 2016 with Australian National University archaeologist Dougald O'Reilly. Schuon told Live Science that they can deduce the site was of virtual significance for a very long time. The jars above ground have been carved from sandstone. It's believed that they were carved during the Iron Age, probably around 500 CE, using iron tools. The tools used to carve the jars were in use between 500 BC and 500 CE, but possibly as late as 800 CE. It's possible that the plain of jars was used as a burial site for longer than previously thought, maybe up to 2,000 years. Some scientists believe that the huge jars were likely used to expose the dead to the elements until only their bones remained. However, local legend says that the giant jars were used to ferment Lao Lao rice wine, a rice whiskey produced in Laos. Still others believe the jars were simply used to collect rainwater. Site 1 is one of 11 of the sites listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It is the closest to town with the most visitors. This site has more than 300 stone jars spread across about 60 acres or 24 hectares. Site 1 contains the only decorated jar. It also contains a cave. Kalani believed the cave was a crematorium, but local people say this is not correct. They say the cave was used as a kiln to bake off the jars. The cave did contain fragments of human bone and teeth as well as glass beads. Site 2 is just a few miles south of Site 1. Site 2 can be reached from Site 1 by motorbike. Site 3 is just a short hike from Site 2, and although Site 52 is the largest site known, with 392 jars, it is the most rarely visited and can only be reached by foot. The team led by Schuon and O'Reilly checked out Site 2. The team used optically stimulated luminescence, or OSL, on the dirt beneath some of the jars. OSL measures the amount of ionizing radiation that has been absorbed by the grains of quartz within the dirt. It can be used to determine when the quartz last saw sunlight. The quartz underneath one jar saw sunlight between 1350 and 730 BC. Under another jar, the date ranges between 860 and 350 BC. Schuon said, "I think we're going to find a range of dates as we continue the analysis." The OSL date ranges show that the jars are older than the burials that surround them. The team also looked at the level of isotopes of lead, uranium, and zircon within the jars. They determined that one of the jars in Site 1 was brought from a sandstone quarry that was 5 miles away. Archaeologists don't know if only different early peoples used the jar sites for burials, or if they were used by later descendants as well. O'Reilly said of the burials, whether they were culturally related to the people who made the jars is a question that we can't define yet. They were able to determine, however, that the stone discs found on the ground were burial markers, not lids to the jars. The jars and other archaeological things in the area are evidence of ancient cultural practices. The plain of jars is located along a crossroads between 2 major civilizations during the Iron Age. Moon Mekong and Red River or the Gulf of Tonkin traded near here, and the jars may have been placed along the trade route. Today, the jars are protected by law, but there are still some questions about them. For instance, who built the jars? Why did they build them? How did they get the jars to their final locations? What were they used for? What do you think? Thanks for listening to today's episode of That's Ruddy Mysterious. I'm your host, Kelly with an I. If you enjoyed this episode, leave a review and follow That's Ruddy Mysterious to be updated about new episodes. Tune in next Tuesday for another thought-provoking tale.